Welcome back to the channel. Nick Olson, Chupacabra Offroad. Excited to share some thoughts on my first driving impressions of the new Kawasaki H2. I put out a couple of videos ever since we've seen some spy photos as well as the release of this car. And of course, it's a lot better for all of you guys to watch when we can give you some feedback after actually having driven the vehicle. So excited to get right into it. As of about now, I've got about 100 miles on the H2. I did 2 rides. The first ride was about 40 miles where the car was completely bone stock with the stock tires and all. And the following week, I did about 60 miles over the same route, same type of terrain here in the North Phoenix Valley with some upgraded 35-inch tires, which are the same tires that I've been running on my other vehicles. So I'm a big bike nerd. You watch other motorcycle shootouts, they have a controlled test tire. So I like the idea of that. I like the idea that many of you are going to be upgrading the stock tires. Unfortunately, I did suffer a flat with my stock tires, so that's another reason why it was my ride was a little shorter than I wanted it to be. And the stock H2 comes with 16-inch wheels, so options to upgrade those tires on the stock rims are extremely limited. So I think a lot of you guys are going to do what I have done and go ahead and upgrade the wheel and tire package. Once you own this thing, of course, have a full-size spare and have a little bit more clearance because this thing's making 250 horse, so plenty of power for the big 35. So let's get into my first ride impression. All right, let's start off the ride review impression with my favorite element of these vehicles, handling and suspension. So starting off with the complete stock setup, I was really impressed by initially the lack of steering feedback in the steering wheel, as well as how precise the steering felt. With the stock wheels and tires to start off, I was trying to think about that because you have a bigger rim with a smaller tire and a lot less sidewall. So the advantage of that is that you get a really responsive feeling. So I can say after driving both sets of tires, I'm very stoked on the handling. The precision of the steering wheel just seems to be the best I've driven of any stock side-by-side. It just feels like there's less input needed to move the car around, and it's very tight and precise. I like the shape of the steering wheel and I like the feel of it. And in terms of handling, once you start getting into corners, it feels quite flat. So they did a good job with the sway bars. They did a good job of just having a connected feel. And it made me think about when I was driving it, you know, is this like a motorcycle, a sport bike engineer who's dialing in these characteristics? Because there was a level of precision to it and it didn't have the big sway, bigger, heavier feel to it. It was nimble. So you combine that steering precision feel with the flatness. You know, it's quite a bit shorter than some of the other 4-seat side-by-sides on the market, and it rides lighter too. So it didn't ride as heavy as a Pro R or a Maverick R, and it was quite noticeable, the length difference, how much shorter it was. So on this channel, I've talked a lot about wheelbase. I've talked a lot about how a shorter wheelbase is ideal. And this thing is right in the sweet spot range of something that not only is big enough to get over on top of whoops, but it's not so excessively long when you're zipping around trails and all that type of thing. It's quite fun. So for the purpose of this review, you can see a lot of the terrain here. I'm going to show just a lot of driving footage without music over it so you can hear the vehicle, because we'll get into that here in a little bit. But there's a lot of tight, twisty turns. You're going fast and you've got to slam on the brakes. And then, you know, you want something that's fun and agile, which usually doesn't happen in a 4-seater, but I can say collectively with all these elements, the handling, the nimbleness, the word I'd probably use to describe this car first out the gate is nimble. So, okay, you're probably thinking it's a little shorter than a Can-Am or a Polaris. It's going to feel nimble, okay, Nick? Well, all of those elements I just described add to it, but a couple other elements add to the overall feeling nimbleness and feeling precise. And the brakes, you know, when I first felt the brakes, I thought they were great. In my opinion, the Pro R sets the bar. It's a 10 out of 10 for a stock UTV. I think they're fantastic. You can drive aggressively and set the car up and move it around. Because of the brakes, because you've got that confidence to know that you can go fast through a wash. If there's a blind turn, you can slow down for it. A big G out in the dunes, whatever you might face. Well, driving this car with the stock tires, I started to get quite impressed with the brakes. I said, well, let's see how it is with bigger 35s, because, you know, in a perfect world, the stock brakes should be strong enough and beefy enough to accommodate some upgraded tires. And after driving it with the bigger, heavier tires, I'm really stoked on the brakes. Once I installed the big tires, I was able to hit them hard on the street and able to get some lock up where the brakes started to squeal. So I thought that was impressive. These tensor regulator 2 tires, I'm a big fan of them. I ran 17 PSI, which is pretty much what I run on other vehicles. I haven't had any issues with flatting. The traction is good. And I think that because of the lighter weight of the tire, it adds to the acceleration and braking performance. So far with the tire at 17 PSI, I was quite stoked, and adding to the overall nimbleness feel when you've got this type of power, which we'll talk about in a second, great braking performance, nimble precision, all of that in a shorter wheelbase. It really allows you to drive hard and squirt through some tight, twisty sections. I smile as I say that because I always talk about how I like a single track on a motorcycle, those type of scenarios, you get into a tight wash, something like that, where you can jam through, or even out in Glamis, jumping in a wash. My buddies are chasing me. I'm trying to duck and make some wild turns and go hard and anticipate big G outs. And I love that style characteristic and all that. So you can tell by my smile, all these elements make for a vehicle that's quite fun to drive when you want to have something nimble and quick and tight. You know, similar to if you hopped out of a 4-seater and jumped into a 2-seat vehicle, you're able to gain that because you have a lighter weight, shorter vehicle. So in terms of a 4-seat package, adding all those things together, and of course some power, which we'll get into next, it is a fun overall package. So we've got to talk about power. That's what dominates the side-by-side discussion. That's what everybody cares about the most, it seems like still. And the Kawasaki is launched with the highest stock horsepower of any side-by-side, 250. So that is 25 horse more than a stock Pro R, and that is 10 horsepower more than a stock Can-Am Maverick R. And does it feel like it's got that much power? I would say it does. The power is quite linear and smooth. This vehicle runs at a little bit higher RPM than some of the other side-by-sides. So it's making peak power above 9,000. And what I notice is it's quite linear and smooth. And then also it's making the power higher in the RPM. So I would say I noticed quite a bit of power from 40 mile an hour up to 70 in that higher range. Down on the bottom, it's very smooth, like trying to explode out of a turn. It's something where you give it a little bit more throttle, let's say, compared to a Pro R. And that grunt, it's kind of hard to compare a Pro R because it's got, the 2-liter and it's got that low end torque. But it is something that I think you're going to be going a little bit faster in this car than you recognize. It's pretty quiet, but the power, it kicks on a little bit later. So I think, in the tuning world, clutching, all those types of things, it might be something where you can kind of control that. I'm always a big fan of low-end grunt. More low-end grunt is almost always better and appreciated. It's one of the reasons why I love a CVT setup. You've got it right when you need it. It's smooth, linear, and you can use that to flow through turns, keep your momentum, and have that power right when you need it. And this is quite good. It just hits a little bit higher up, I'd say, in the miles per hour. So I'm really excited to drive this car in the sand, because in the sand dunes, you're usually not going to be going below 15, 20 mile an hour, and you're already going to be up there at a higher momentum, higher speed, and all that. So for the purpose of what I'm saying in this video, you can see here on some of the riding clips, I'm in some tighter washes and some typical desert riding. You got some big G outs, some things once you get going, you really have to be watchful, because there's something you could potentially flat or even worse, and rough mountainous, terrain, I'd call it. So that's what I'm seeing so far. The power is good. I'm not saying it's not soft off the bottom end, but what I'm saying is it's very smooth and linear. And this is in the high power mode, which I drove it most of the time. I did try a couple other power modes. I bumped it down into the low mode here for a small little rock crawl hill, or not even a rock crawl hill, but a technical hill. The low power mode does feel quite soft. I almost think that when I do take this thing to the rocks and go rock crawling, I want to keep it in the middle power mode, because as I've done some rock crawling, there's those scenarios really are the most challenging, are when you're getting to an obstacle and you do need to give your vehicle a bump to get the momentum to get up over a cliff, up over a rock, and have that feel dialed where you're giving it the right amount of power, where you're getting up over something, but of course not too much where you're going to get yourself into deep trouble. So the low power mode felt quite low. It'd be interesting to see like Tokerville Falls, a trail like that in southern Utah. If you're just kind of cruising along a rocky, bumpy river bottom, if you'd like that or if medium's going to be the ticket. So low felt quite soft. So I'll report more about that when we take it to Utah. That would be a great place to try some of those modes a little bit more, where it's really nice to just have some nice smooth throttle control and go from there. But I really enjoy the high mode on the power setting. Before we talk about the engine noise, kind of wrap this thing up, we can't not talk about suspension. This vehicle, if you're not familiar, does have Fox live valve suspension. Unlike the Polaris, it doesn't have a red button, which automatically firms it all the way up. This claims that the system is smart enough and it's not going to need that. And it also comes with three adjustable modes. So I was just talking about the 3 adjustable power modes. One thing that's interesting to note on that, you can't adjust the power modes until you pretty much come down to a stop, a couple miles an hour. Whereas, of course, you can adjust the suspension modes on the fly based on whatever you're doing. And I like that because I'm playing with the suspension modes quite a bit. I wanted to try it in the soft mode, medium, and then firm. Generally, when I get into a really aggressive section, I'm running firm because the vehicle is going to sway less and I can just drive more aggressively around turns and over big whoop sections, things like that may arise. The car felt quite firm. My overall takeaway from the suspension so far is that it might be a little on the low side. The compression settings are quite firm, and it might be a characteristic. Like if you guys remember when the Can-Am X3 came out, a lot of people were raising them higher up because perhaps to come from the factory, they had to be low enough to pass the safety certifications, that type of thing. I prefer something that's has a little bit of sway, more feel, more connectedness to the ground. For a stock setup, it's pretty good, but I think I'll want to raise the car up, and then there's some crossover rings that come stock that you can raise up as well, because even in the soft mode, it was quite firm. It wasn't that bad over rocky, chattery stuff, but when you've got 3 suspension modes to play with, I'd love to have soft be great from 2 to 35 miles an hour. Medium at some typical trail running, like a lot of this content or a lot of this footage I'm showing you right now, and then firm for driving quite aggressive or the sand dunes. So again, I'm excited to drive this car in the sand because I think there's a lot of compression dampening built in, but there's so much compression dampening that it feels like I can't feel the mid-stroke. When I drove with the bigger tires, we added a full-size spare. We had our tools in the back, so we had some weight on the back, which I generally like how that makes the vehicle handle. It didn't take away too much from the nimbleness of the car, but I thought we were going to get closer to bottoming out the rear of the vehicle, which I don't think I did. So I like to have more feel. I like to know when I'm going to bottom out, kind of like a typical motocross adage, like 1 time per lap on a track, you do want to bottom out. So I would like to have a vehicle that I know once we get it all tuned, how I like it, that it would bottom out, and in different scenarios, perhaps in the dunes or even when you're going really hard through some bumps. And it just felt like there was a little bit less travel than it has because there's a lot of compression dampening. So I'm taking on a big ride here next week, several hundred miles from Havasu down to Yuma. It'd be a great way to just sit in the car for 10, 12 hours a day and get a better feel of it. But I mostly enjoyed it in soft mode. So I think what I'll do is I will do what I'm saying. I'll lift it up a little bit. I'll raise the crossovers. By lifting the car also, too, we're getting out of the bump zone of the internal bypass shocks. A lot of times when the cars are really low, these internal bypass shocks are quite sensitive and you're a harsher part of the suspension travel. And I just want a little bit more of that soft, fluttery. I want the soft to be a little bit softer. And I think this is a free way that I can do it, just a little tweaking before we get into upgrading the springs, upgrading the valving. So as I mentioned earlier, I was smiling when I drive it, the precision, all this type of thing. I'm wondering if the engineers have a sport bike background and they like that characteristic where it was a little bit firmer, really flat. I mean, jamming around some fast turns that are rutted out, that type of thing. It just felt quite stable. One thing that's also I noticed handling and suspension, it's quite difficult to break the back end loose. Situations where you're just thinking the back end's going to come around on you, it just wouldn't. It was almost like you had to try to break the back end around. So I'm not sure if that is the rear geometry. The rear wheels seem to be towed in a little stock. I'm not sure exactly why that was, but even with the power, just trying to zip on it, romp on it, you think you'd get it to break more, but there's something about it. It stays quite connected. Steering feedback, I felt a little bit more on the wheels and tires. I made a comment or I made a post on social. I hadn't seen much information if you guys have upgraded to 15-inch wheels, if it was a 4.3 offset or a 5.2. I reached out to Method Wheels and they suggested a 4.3 on their website, so that's what I went with. I did experience some steering feedback. I don't like that offset. We do have some 5.2 wheels, which will bring the car in, make it a couple inches narrower and mitigate some of that feeling. So I think I'm going to try to do that this week as well. And from what I have heard after that post is that there are some people that have had good success running 5.2-inch offset. I just didn't want to come in with an offset that was so snug that it would rub or cause some issues. So now that we've kind of determined that and spoken to some other people, I feel more comfortable trying that offset. And I think that'll mitigate some of the feedback that I experienced. And, stock, there was virtually no feedback, and I quite enjoyed that. I mean, I think other than a Maverick R, there's no other vehicle that has that minimal amount of steering feedback. So great. You can tell they really focus on the feel at the steering wheel of the car. So suspension, just on the firmer side, some people might like that, like a short course style, firm drive. Honestly, probably drive it a little bit harder, drive it more aggressively. It just lacks a little plushness for me, and I'll be chasing that here in other scenarios. And just getting to know, like I said, how it feels by using all the mid-stroke. It doesn't feel like the back end droops out a lot. But one more thing I noticed too, I wanted to talk about the wheelbase. So I got to do a couple of tuning sessions with Wayne Israelson, who's an incredibly talented suspension tuner. He has a suspension tuning company, Alltech, and he talks about some of these concepts like in more of a physics type of explanation. So it just made me think, because the car is shorter, there's a little bit less of this forward and aft. And I noticed that when I had my speed vehicle, I thought it was because the speed had a shorter trailing arm. There was less of a back and forth going over whoops or roller whoops, long whoops. And this also has that, but it's kind of hard to tell what it feels like when you get on top of the whoops going fast. So I don't want to get on top of them going too hard just yet and break the car. But there is a little bit less of that what Wayne, the physics of the forward and back, you're not fighting because it is shorter. So there's a level of it being stable and planted. I just need to chase that feel so I can get a better idea of how hard I can push it. And I think after spending 20-something hours in it this next week, I'll get a better idea to report back to you guys. So that's what I was able to kind of deduce out of the first 100 miles. I can't wait to take this thing to the sand. Got to see how this thing lives and breathes with the 250 horse, the suspension, everything that I mentioned that I really liked on the type of terrain that I rode here. So we're going to end this video with a lot of the riding footage. You can see by how fast I drive, the terrain I was driving in, and then finally sound. So a couple of people have been talking about the supercharger, and it's got a little whistle. And the car overall is pretty quiet, which I love. I'm not a loud vehicle type of person. What's interesting is at different RPM ranges, there's the supercharger making some noises. And when you're new to it, it almost sounds like, wait, is that CVT? Is there some issue or chatter in the driveline? Is it the CVT? Is it the driveline? But it's not. It's just the noises that the supercharger makes. So it's not loud and obnoxious. We'll see after spending 2 12, 13-hour days in it, because the car isn't so quiet, that loud, but it is an interesting set of noises, and I don't know if it can be detuned or taken away. It's just the nature of a supercharger. So I'll let you be the judge. That's why I want to leave some of these raw clips, no music over them, and then you can kind of get a hear and feel. I didn't hear or feel any type of rattle. The car feels incredibly tight, of course, as it should, but the noises of the supercharger make it sound like it's something from the driveline that it's not, because we double checked everything a couple of times, and it's just a nuance of this vehicle. So comment below what you think. Comment if you own an H2, if you have some of these similar thoughts and ideas, if you've driven them back to back with other vehicles. Of course, we're going to keep reporting as we drive this thing more and more in different terrain and give you our honest thoughts and feedback. But so far, really digging the H2. I think it's got a lot of things about it I really like. Couple quick comments. Visibility out of the vehicle is great. We'll have a better idea once we take it on some rocks, once we take it on some dunes going up and down. I love the look and the profile of the stock cage. Probably look even cooler with a custom aluminum roof. Maybe we should do something like that. And then finally, 2 overall leg room and seating position. The seats themselves, I like the bolster, particularly up here in the shoulders. They felt comfortable. We're going to upgrade to some solid seat harnesses just because I'm not a fan of ratcheting seat harnesses. I don't feel as safe. And I will say, me being tall with long legs, the leg room felt a little bit tight. I did ride passenger, and the dead pedal in particular on both sides is quite short, where I kept my feet in a longer position. So it's a little shorter than other side-by-sides. And if you're really tall, if you're taller than me, make sure you sit in it and see what you think. Overall width inside of it, I like how they set up the doors. It's a little bit more of a bowed, so it does feel like it's got plenty of elbow room. And if two big buddies in the front seats, doesn't feel like you're rubbing elbows or anything. And so side to side, it's good. How you look and see over the vehicle is great. I like the feel of it. And it almost seems like the rear seats are quite spacious too, even though it's on the shorter side of a wheelbase these days in 2025. So just kind of my first takeaways of the ergonomics of it. And we'll report more as we drive this thing harder and see how she goes. So thanks everyone watching. Thanks all you guys that subscribe and pay attention. Comment below what you want to see next on this thing. And of course, we'll see you on the next one.
The river was coming up this, it's gotten worse, looks like.
Oh, yeah.